Welcome back, everybody, to the Deep Dive. This time, we're tackling a tough topic, breaking free from patterns of abuse. And it's a sensitive one for sure, but incredibly important. You've sent over these excerpts, right, from chapter 12 of this book, and it seems to be all about, like, recognizing those patterns and taking those first steps to heal.
Yeah, it's heavy stuff.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, definitely. But it's something we need to talk about. Yeah.
For sure. For sure. And approaching this whole topic, sensitivity and respect are key. The source material, what we're working with here, really emphasizes like there's always hope, always help available, for those who've experienced abuse.
And that's such a good place to start.
Right.
Like, remembering there is hope is so important. And it seems like this chapter, chapter 12, it covers a lot. Physical abuse, emotional abuse, the impact on children. I mean, where do we even begin? Let's start with physical abuse, I guess. What really stands out to you in the source material about somebody in that situation?
I think the first thing that really hits you is like just how serious it is, how serious physical abuse is. The chapter really drives home that point. It emphasizes that even just one instance, just one, it increases the risk of future violence so much.
Wow.
And often that violence just gets worse and worse. It escalates. It's chilling, honestly, but it's the reality. We need to acknowledge it.
It's definitely a wake-up call. It's not something to be, taken lightly at all.
Absolutely not.
But the source material doesn't just, like, leave us hanging with that, right?
Right.
It also gives some advice, some practical stuff.
It does. One thing that really stood out to me was the advice about getting help. Like reaching out, even if you're not, ready to leave the relationship yet, it highlights like support groups, therapy, shelters, as potential lifelines.
Those are huge. Just knowing those resources exist can be a huge step.
Absolutely.
The source also talks about the impact on children, which, I mean, it's tough to even think about.
It's heartbreaking, really. The chapter points out that kids who are exposed to domestic violence are at a much higher risk, right, for developing problems later on. Behavioral problems, and even becoming abusers themselves.
Oh.
It's this cycle that can be so, so difficult to break.
It really is. Which I guess is why it's so important to talk about how to break it.
Yeah.
How do you even start to break free? What does the source suggest? Like concrete steps?
Well, it starts with small things, small but empowering actions. The chapter really emphasizes that even seemingly small steps can help restore a sense of control. So, for example, it suggests like packing a bag with essentials, and then snatching it, like at a friend's house, or, memorizing the phone number of a local shelter.
Those are things you can do right now, today. That's empowering.
Exactly. It's about taking back control.
I like that. And there are other concrete steps too, like getting legal advice. Does the source talk about that?
Oh, yeah. It definitely encourages that. Like talking to a legal advisor, like as soon as possible. It's about understanding your rights, exploring options like restraining orders.
Yeah.
And starting to like think about the legal side of things, separation, divorce, that kind of stuff.
It's about that sense of agency again.
Right.
Taking back control.
Exactly.
Abuse thrives on secrecy and isolation. So taking those steps, reaching out, connecting with legal resources, that can be so powerful.
So powerful. And there's even, the source even recommends self-defense training as a way to build confidence, self-reliance.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I can see that.
It's not about becoming like, some kind of expert fighter. It's about reclaiming your body, your own body.
Yeah.
Developing a sense of, physical empowerment, like knowing how to protect yourself if you need to.
Right, in those dangerous situations.
Exactly.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. Abuse so often involves violating physical boundaries. So learning self-defense, it's almost like reclaiming those boundaries.
It is.
Asserting your right to, your right to safety. So we've talked about those immediate safety measures. What about, like, the long term, like building towards independence? What does the source say about that?
Well, it recommends a couple of things, like gathering important documents, birth certificates, insurance papers, financial records, all that stuff. It's about, having what you need to start over. And it also encourages, starting to save money, even if it's just a little bit, like a few dollars here and there.
So it's like creating a safety net.
Yeah.
A financial safety net, so that when you're ready to leave, you have something to fall back on.
Yes, exactly. The chapter is very clear about this. Financial independence, it's key. It's a key step to breaking free from abuse. And it suggests some, practical things, like opening a separate bank account, getting a credit card in your own name, even finding ways to earn some extra income, discreetly.
It's about chipping away at that dependence
Yeah.
that abusers often cultivate that sense of helplessness.
It is. It really is.
And taking those steps toward financial autonomy, that can be so liberating,
Yeah.
so powerful.
I agree.
It's like sending a message to yourself and to the abuser. Like, I can take care of myself. I don't need you to survive.
100%.
Now, we've been talking about leaving,
Yeah.
but we both know it's not easy. It's rarely simple.
No, it's a process.
Yeah, the source even says it's often back and forth, filled with doubt, fear. Does the source, does it offer any, like, emotional strategies for navigating that challenging journey?
It does. It does. One of the things it really emphasizes is learning to recognize the signs, like the signs of impending violence. It encourages victims to pay attention, to be really attuned to their partner's behavior. Notice those subtle shifts, mood changes, tone of voice, all those little things that often precede an abusive episode.
It's like becoming a detective almost.
Right.
Like watching for those early warning signs.
Yeah.
So you can protect yourself before things get out of hand. Does the source give any advice about, what to do in those moments when you see those signs?
Yeah, it suggests having like a pre-planned reason to leave the house. If you sense things are escalating, something simple, taking out the trash, walking the dog, like a quick errand, just an excuse ready so you can get out before it gets dangerous.
And what if it's too late for that? What if the violence is already starting? What does the source say then?
It's very clear. It says, get out. Just get out. Go somewhere safe, a friend's house, a shelter, even a hotel. Don't try to reason. Don't try to calm them down. Your safety comes first. And if you have kids, take them with you. The chapter really stresses that. Children are often so traumatized by witnessing violence, even if they're not the target.
So it's about protecting yourself and protecting your kids above all else. But what about after you leave? I mean, what about the emotional part, the aftermath? Does the source, does it offer any guidance for dealing with that?
It does. It acknowledges that, victims often struggle with a lot of difficult feelings: shame, guilt, self-blame. And that's where that reasons for leaving exercise comes in, the one we talked about before. It's about really confronting those negative thoughts, reminding yourself why you left, why it was essential.
And connecting with your support system.
Yes, reaching out to friends, family, a therapist. Abuse thrives on isolation, so breaking that silence, sharing your story, that can be so healing.
It really can. So we've talked about physical abuse quite a bit, but emotional abuse can be just as damaging, if not more so. What does the source emphasize about recognizing it and breaking free?
Well, the chapter acknowledges that emotional abuse, it can be so insidious because it often doesn't leave those visible scars. It's like this slow, corrosive process that just like eats away at your self-esteem, your sense of worth. And one of the biggest challenges with it is it can be so hard to even recognize.
So how do you know? How do you know if you're experiencing it? What are some of the signs the source highlights?
Abusers, they use all these subtle tactics, manipulation, gaslighting, control, to keep their victims off balance, questioning their reality, like gaslighting, for example. It's this tactic where the abuser makes the victim doubt their own memories, their own perceptions. It's like it makes them question their sanity.
That sounds so disorienting, so confusing.
It is. And the chapter encourages victims to start, keeping a journal, documenting these incidents, tracking the patterns, to start to see the abuse for what it is.
It's like shining a light on something that's been hidden.
Yeah.
Even from yourself. And once you start to see it, once you recognize it, what then?
Then it's about setting boundaries, learning to say no, asserting your needs, protecting your emotional well-being.
It's about taking back that power, right?
Yeah, shifting that dynamic, reclaiming your voice, your autonomy. But, setting boundaries, that can be really hard, especially if you've been, conditioned to put your partner's needs first.
Right.
The chapter acknowledges that. And it suggests therapy. That therapy can be really valuable here. A therapist can help you explore those underlying beliefs, those things that make it so hard to assert yourself. And they can give you the tools and support you need to start setting those healthy boundaries.
That makes sense. What about communication? Does the source offer any advice about, how to communicate better in a relationship where there's emotional abuse?
It does. It emphasizes learning to express your feelings assertively. Articulate your needs, stand up for yourself in a respectful way, but firm. It's about moving from like a passive role to an active one, finding your voice, reclaiming your agency.
So much of this seems to be about that, huh? Recognizing your worth, knowing that you deserve respect,
Mm-hmm.
and having the courage to stand up for yourself.
Yes, exactly. The chapter makes it very clear. Breaking free from emotional abuse, it's not about changing the abuser. It's about changing yourself, healing your wounds, creating a life where you feel safe, respected, empowered.
It's about building a better life for
That's
yourself.
right.
And it encourages reaching out for support
Right.
from friends, family, therapists, support groups. It's about breaking that isolation.
It is. It's about remembering you're not alone. There are people who understand, who can offer support, who can help you on this journey.
That's so important. We've covered a lot of ground here. And actually, we're running out of time for this segment. But don't worry, we'll pick up right where we left off in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, so picking up where we left off, talking about the impact of abuse on kids. This chapter really digs into the consequences, the really devastating consequences of growing up in a home where abuse is happening. It's not just the physical danger, but like the deep emotional and psychological, wounds it can leave.
Right. And you mentioned earlier, like, children are really perceptive. Like, they pick up on things.
Oh, absolutely. They are. The chapter even points out, even if they don't actually see the abuse, they still absorb it. The tension, the fear, that underlying sense of instability, like walking on eggshells all the time. And that takes a toll. Imagine being a kid, constantly on edge, never knowing when the next outburst is going to happen.
That's tough. It's a lot for a child to carry.
Yeah.
What are some of the, the long-term effects the source talks about?
Well, it mentions anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder even. They're more likely to struggle with all of those things. And it makes sense, right? I mean, they may also have trouble forming healthy relationships later on because, well, they haven't had a healthy model to learn from.
Right. So it affects their whole understanding of relationships, like what a loving relationship even looks like.
Exactly. And like we said before, they're also more likely to repeat those patterns. The cycle of abuse, either becoming victims themselves or abusers, because that's what they've been exposed to.
It's a scary thought. But the source does offer some hope, right? Like, what does it say about breaking that cycle?
The key is early intervention. The sooner these kids get support, the better their chances. Counseling, therapy, and it's not just about helping the children, it's about supporting the non-abusive parent too.
That makes sense. I mean, they're probably struggling too. And they need support to create a safe environment for their kids.
Yeah, exactly. The chapter really emphasizes that, like giving kids that sense of security, predictability, a home where they feel loved, valued, protected, where they can learn that relationships can be good, that they can be sources of comfort and strength, not fear and pain.
That's what every child deserves.
Yeah.
And I think it also mentioned teaching them healthy relationship skills,
Yeah.
like communication, boundaries, conflict resolution, that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. Those are essential skills, learning to speak up, set boundaries,
Mhm.
resolve conflicts peacefully. These are things that'll benefit them their whole lives, not just romantic relationships, but all relationships.
Right. It's like giving them a toolkit for healthy relationships, something they might not have had before.
Yeah.
And the source recommends family therapy too, right?
It does. Family therapy can be really effective
Yeah.
to address those underlying issues that contribute to the abuse and to help everyone heal, move forward together. It acknowledges that it's a process and it can be tough, but breaking that cycle, it's so essential, not just for the family, but for society as a whole.
Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit. Let's talk about some practical steps, things someone can actually do to break free.
Yeah.
I know the source material has a lot of specific advice, especially for people experiencing physical abuse.
Yeah, it does. It even has like a list, 10 specific actions. It's a mix of like immediate safety measures and then longer term planning.
Okay.
So for immediate safety, it recommends two main things: gathering information and making an emergency plan.
So like having a bag packed and ready to go, knowing where the nearest shelter is, important phone numbers memorized, that kind of thing.
Exactly. It's about having a plan for those moments when things get really bad, when you need to leave quickly. And the chapter also stresses reaching out to like a crisis line or a shelter, even if you're not ready to leave yet.
Right, just that initial contact. It can be so important.
It can. It can connect you with resources, support,
Yeah.
even legal advice.
Speaking of legal advice, does the source talk about that at all?
It does. It encourages victims to talk to a legal advisor as early as possible. It's about knowing your rights,
Yeah.
what options you have, restraining orders, that kind of thing, and starting to think about, the legal side of leaving, separation, divorce, all of that.
It's about taking back control again, isn't it?
It is.
Abuse thrives on secrecy and isolation, so taking those steps, it's like you're breaking free.
You are. You really are.
And the force also recommends self-defense training
Right.
as a way to build confidence, feel more self-reliant.
Yeah, it does. And again, it's not about becoming, some kind of martial arts expert. It's about reclaiming your body. Like
Right.
having that sense of physical empowerment, knowing how to protect yourself.
In a dangerous situation.
Right.
It makes sense. Abuse often involves, that violation of physical boundaries.
Yeah.
So learning to defend yourself, it's almost like reclaiming those boundaries.
It is. It totally is.
Asserting your right to safety.
It-
So we've talked about the immediate stuff. What about building towards long-term independence? What does this source suggest for that?
It recommends a couple of key things, like first, gathering important documents. Birth certificates, insurance papers, financial records, anything you'd need to start over. And second, saving money. Even if it's just a little bit at a time.
Building that financial safety net.
Yes, so that when you're ready, you have some resources.
It's about chipping away at that dependence that abusers often create. That feeling of helplessness, like you can't make it on your own.
It is.
So taking those steps toward financial independence, that can be huge.
Huge. It really can be.
It's like sending a message.
Yeah.
To yourself, to the abuser. Like, I'm strong. I can do this. I don't need you.
Exactly. It's about taking back your power, your life.
Now, we've talked a lot about leaving, but we both know it's not always easy or straightforward.
No, it's definitely a process.
Yeah, the source even acknowledges that it's often back and forth, filled with doubts and fears. Does it offer any strategies for dealing with that, like the emotional side of things?
It does. It really emphasizes the importance of recognizing the signs, like those warning signs that things might be about to escalate. It encourages victims to, really pay attention to their partner's behavior. Notice those subtle shifts in mood and tone of voice, those things that often come before an abusive episode.
Like becoming a detective, almost.
Yeah, kind of.
So you can protect yourself before it gets out of hand.
Yeah.
Does it give any specific advice for what to do when you see those signs?
It suggests having a reason to leave the house ready, just in case. If you sense things are getting tense, something simple, taking out the trash, walking the dog, running an errand, anything. Just an excuse so you can remove yourself from the situation.
And what if it's too late? What if the violence has already started? What does it say then?
The message is clear. Get out. Go somewhere safe. A friend's house, a shelter, a hotel, anywhere. Don't try to reason with the abuser. Don't try to calm them down. Just get yourself to safety. And if you have children, take them with you. It emphasizes that kids, they're often really traumatized by seeing violence, even if they aren't the direct target.
It's about prioritizing safety, yours and your children's, above everything else. But what about the emotional part after you've left? Does the source offer any guidance for dealing with that, the aftermath?
It does. It acknowledges that, victims often struggle with feelings of shame, guilt, self-blame. And that's where the reasons for leaving exercise can be so helpful. That thing we talked about earlier, it's about reminding yourself why you left, why it was necessary.
And it's about reaching out
Right.
to your support system.
Exactly. Talking to friends, family, a therapist. Abuse thrives in isolation, so breaking that silence, telling your story, that can be really healing.
It can. Okay, so we focused a lot on physical abuse, but emotional abuse can be just as bad, maybe even worse. What does the source say about recognizing that and breaking free from it?
The chapter acknowledges that emotional abuse, it can be really sneaky because it often doesn't leave those visible marks, those bruises. It's this slow process that chips away at you, at your self-esteem, your sense of worth. And it can be so hard to even recognize it's happening.
So how do you know? How do you know if you're experiencing it? What are some of the signs?
Well, abusers, they use all kinds of tactics. Manipulation, gaslighting, control. To keep their victims off balance, make them doubt themselves, like gaslighting, for example. That's where the abuser makes the victim question their own memories, their own sanity. It's really messed up.
It sounds incredibly confusing, like you wouldn't even know it was real anymore.
Exactly, and that's why the chapter encourages victims to start keeping a journal. To track the incidents, the patterns, to start to see it clearly.
It's about shining a light on it, right? Bringing it out into the open. And once you recognize it, what then?
Then it's about setting boundaries, learning to say no, standing up for yourself, protecting your emotional well-being.
Taking back your power.
Yeah, shifting that dynamic, reclaiming your voice. But setting boundaries, it can be tough, especially if you've been conditioned to always put your partner's needs first.
That makes sense. It's a hard habit to break.
It is. The chapter acknowledges that. And it suggests therapy, that therapy can be really helpful. A therapist can help you understand those beliefs that make it so hard to stand up for yourself and give you tools and support to start setting those healthy boundaries.
What about communication? Does it offer any advice on communicating better in a relationship where there's emotional abuse?
It does. It emphasizes learning to express your feelings in a healthy way. Being assertive, saying what you need, standing up for yourself, but respectfully. It's about moving from that passive role to an active one, finding your voice, your agency.
So much of this comes back to that, huh? Knowing your worth, knowing you deserve respect, and having the courage to stand up for yourself.
Exactly. The chapter makes it very clear. Breaking free from emotional abuse, it's not about changing the abuser. It's about changing yourself, healing, building a better life.
And it encourages reaching out, right?
Yeah.
For support, whether
Yeah.
it's friends, family, a therapist, support groups.
Absolutely. It's about remembering you're not alone. There
Yeah.
are people who understand, who can support you, can help you through this.
And on that note, we're actually running out of time for this segment. But don't worry, we'll dive into the long-term process of healing and talk about building healthy relationships moving forward in our final segment.
And we're back for the last part of our deep dive
Uh-huh.
into breaking free from these patterns of abuse. We talked about a lot, right? Recognizing the signs, taking those first steps, the impact on children. But now let's talk about, what comes next, the long road, healing, moving forward, all of that. Right, this is where the real work begins. Leaving, that's just the start. The source material really emphasizes that. Healing from abuse, it's a process. It takes time. There's no quick fix.
No magic wand, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And the chapter, it acknowledges that, healing, it's a journey. It requires commitment, self-compassion, a willingness to really do the work, the inner work.
Mm.
And it also says there's no one right way to do it.
Exactly. What works for one person might not work for another. It's about, finding what resonates with you, what feels supportive, what helps you move toward wholeness. And the source material talks about therapy being a big part of that, of the healing journey.
It specifically mentions, finding a therapist who specializes in trauma and abuse. Why is that so important? Why that specialization?
It's about having someone who gets it.
Yeah.
Who understands the dynamics of abuse, who can provide that safe space for you to explore those painful experiences and develop healthy coping mechanisms. They can help you work through those really tough emotions and start to, rebuild.
It's like having a guide for that journey, someone who can offer support and expertise. The source material also talks about support groups, like connecting with others who've been through something similar. What makes that so valuable?
Validation, empowerment. Going through abuse, it can be so isolating. And support groups, they offer that sense of community, shared understanding. It's a place where you can share your story without shame, without judgment, and you get support, encouragement from people who get it, who've walked a similar path.
It's that feeling of not being alone.
Right,
Right.
exactly.
The source material also mentions self-care, like certain practices that can be helpful for healing. What are some of the things it suggests?
Journaling, meditation, spending time in nature, creative activities, things like that. It's about, being kind to yourself, giving yourself permission to grieve, to process, to heal at your own pace.
That's about nourishing yourself,
Right.
mind, body, and soul, recognizing that you deserve that care, especially after what you've been through.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the source material also points out that, healing isn't a straight line.
No, it's not.
There are going to be ups and downs, good days, bad days, progress, setbacks. It's all part of it.
It is. It's about being patient with yourself
Yeah.
and honoring that process.
That's a good reminder. It's easy to get discouraged,
Yeah.
when you have a setback, but it sounds like the message is be kind to yourself
Yeah.
and keep going. Now, this is a tough one, but the source material also talks about forgiveness, forgiving yourself,
Yeah.
and even forgiving the abuser.
Right. And it's very clear about this. Forgiveness doesn't mean condoning the abuse. It's not about letting the abuser off the hook. It's about understanding that ultimately forgiveness is for you. It's about letting go of that anger, that resentment that keeps you stuck in the past.
So it's not about minimizing what happened or saying it was okay. It's about freeing yourself from that burden so you can move on. But how do you even begin to forgive someone who hurt you so much? Does the source offer any guidance on that?
It doesn't give specific steps, but it emphasizes that forgiveness is a process, and often a long one, a difficult one. It might involve therapy, journaling, spiritual practices, or even just, giving yourself time to work through the pain,
Yeah.
the anger.
So it's about finding your own way,
Yeah.
your own path, and honoring your own pace,
Right.
and recognizing that forgiveness, it's a gift you give yourself.
It is.
And as you start to heal, as you start to rebuild, the source material also talks about boundaries,
Oh,
healthy boundaries
yeah.
in all your relationships, not just romantic ones.
Yes. It talks about learning to say no, asserting your needs, protecting your emotional well-being. It's about recognizing, you have the right to be treated with respect,
Yeah.
and you don't have to tolerate any kind of abuse from anyone.
It's about standing up for yourself
Hmm?
and surrounding yourself with people who value you, who respect you and your boundaries. It's about creating a life that's full of good things, love, joy, healthy connections, all of that.
It is, and it's about remembering that healing is possible. You can break free from those patterns and create a life that's truly yours. A life full of peace, joy, authentic connection.
That's a powerful message. It really is. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to thank you, for walking us through this tough but so important topic. And to everyone listening, if this has resonated with you, please know you're not alone. There are resources out there. There are strategies that can help. And there's a path to a brighter future.
You are worthy of love, respect, safety. Remember that. And you have the strength to heal, to create a life filled with joy and peace.
And one last thought for you as you continue on your own journey. How can you use what we've talked about today, not just to heal your own wounds, but to create a world where abuse is less common, where victims feel empowered to speak up, and where everyone feels safe, respected, and loved? Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.